Hello, hi out there. Welcome. Poets, can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Um, Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Michael Wiegers, Executive Editor of Copper Canyon Press, and that's my cat. And I'm coming to you live from my home in Port Townsend, Washington, which is on Coast Salish land, in Sklallam land. Thank you for joining us this evening for a celebration of poetry. In a few minutes, we'll be starting our live book launch with CHRIS Abani, Dana Levin, and Victoria Chang. They're each going to read from their gorgeous new books published just in time for April, which is a couple of days from now and is National Poetry Month. I'm grateful to be with all of you in this virtual space at the start of spring. Please let us know by dropping a note in the chat where you're watching from, and we'll hope to call out some names as we go. For 2 years now, since March 2020 and the start of the pandemic, these online events have allowed us to connect with you, our readers, all over the world. To do so safely without barriers of geographical distances. And like I said, people are coming from all over the world. Quickly, I'm seeing Vermont, Albuquerque, Madison, Longmont, Toronto, Austin. I can't keep up. There are so many of you. Thank you for joining us. This is fun and exciting for us here. Tonight's launch party will raise funds for Copper Canyon Press to help us publish another extraordinary season of poetry books. We named this particular campaign a thing like joy, adopting a phrase from one of Dana Levin's poems, because even in deeply distressing times, even in times of war and plague, we hear again and again from readers that poetry is a source of joy or something like it. We hope and trust that Copper Canyon Press and its poets bring you joy tonight and throughout the year. Speaking of joy, it's a total joy to work with our hardworking board of directors, whom I know are also out there tonight watching. I also want to shout out to our donors who make everything we do possible. And that includes generous funders such as the National Endowment for the Arts, For Culture, Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, CLMP, and Lannan Foundation. And of course, a big thank you to those of you who will make a gift to Copper Canyon Press tonight. I won't wait too long before introducing our poets, but I want to go over a few quick logistics just to make certain we're all comfortable in this shared virtual space. If it would help you to see closed captioning, you can enable the captions at the bottom of your screen. At the bottom of your Zoom screen in the bar on the bottom. Additionally, if it would help you to follow along as our poets read their poems, you can find a PDF of the poems they'll read in order by following a link that will be dropped in the chat. We are going to be live streaming this reading simultaneously to Facebook, and the event will be recorded and shared on our website. You can send a note of encouragement to tonight's readers or just say hello by clicking on the chat icon down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I also want to invite you tonight, as our brilliant poets read, to drop a note in the chat when a line or a phrase or image from a poem really finds its place in you. And when you hear some words that feel like a gift to you, go ahead and type them in the chat box as well. At the evening, I'll try to share some of those to get a sense of our collective response, but I'll also encourage you to read along as your fellow audience members are responding. So I want to also thank our tech team who is running the logistics tonight. We've probably all become very familiar and accustomed to online events like this and may not realize that there are a lot of people behind the scenes who make everything work. And personally, I want to express my gratitude for my colleagues for all their great work and good care. So one thing that's great about online readings is that we don't have to wait in line at the end of the reading to actually get a copy, of a book. You can do it at any time. So tonight, instead of purchasing new releases, we're inviting you to make a donation to Copper Canyon Press, and we will happily send you the books you request. As a nonprofit independent book publisher, we've been entirely dedicated to poetry for almost 50 years. We literally could not continue the invigorating, challenging, and sustaining work of making poetry books without your donations. So thank you in advance. And again, we'll drop that donation link in the chat so that you can make your gift at any time and reserve your copy of these books, which I'm confident you're about to fall in love with. As I introduce our first reader, CHRIS Abani, we're also going to share a screen that gives you the option of using a QR code to link to our donation page. It's easy to use. To use the QR code, if you're watching on a computer, simply grab your smartphone, open your camera app, and hover over the QR code until you see a link pop up. Then just tap that link and choose how much you'd like to give and which books you want. Thank you again for your generosity. So starting with CHRIS Abani, the author of 7 previous collections of poetry, CHRIS is also a novelist, a memoirist, an essayist, screenwriter, and playwright. Born in Nigeria to an Igbo father and English mother, he has resided in the United States since 2001. He's the recipient of numerous awards, including the PEN USA Freedom to Write Award, the Prince Claus Award, a Lannan Literary Fellowship, a Hearst and Wright Legacy Award, a PEN Beyond the Margins Award, the PEN Hemingway Book Award, and a Guggenheim Fellowship. CHRIS is known as an international voice on human rights, on art, ethics, and our shared political responsibilities. I've now had the great pleasure of working together across 3 books with CHRIS, and with each new work, I've marveled at how he's managed to somehow raise the bar even further in terms of craft, sound, and emotional resonance. His newest collection is a beautiful book, and I think it's his most thrillingly vulnerable and inviting work yet. It's just a gorgeous new collection. CHRIS, I'm really looking forward to hearing you read some of these new poems for us. Take it away.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Hi, good evening, everyone. Sorry. It doesn't matter how long I do Zoom, I always forget to unmute myself or to do the wrong thing. So I'm reading tonight from a book called Smoke in the Bible. I'm just going to read 4 poems and taken from different places, and hopefully it will stitch together a narrative for you. That's it, really. The first poem is called Flay. The point of a pen opens a hole into a soul's dereliction. This search for the right word bores through stone. Sunlight takes no measure of what is clung to. A man can place the half dome of a tomato, slice into flesh, and cut an island of loss. Migrant punished by spice and the scent of cooking, you wake up on a cold day in another country and put your faith in hot rice and braised goat and the persistent aftertaste of a lost home. Gospels are made of less than this. But outside it is morning. A summer breeze burns down to the water and the ocean begins. White Egret. The title comes actually from a beautiful verse of Ifa, which is a traditional African spiritual practice. So maybe I'll give you a little bit of the Yoruba for that. Leke leke, obi ori yerenture, deva fumba bagba lakudi, nigbati won fojoko, reni ba reni woni ko rubo. Igba odun leni niku niku, moti di baba bagba lakudi ni mowa. Epigraph. The whole earth is filled with the love of God, Kwame Dawes. A stream in a forest and a boy fishing, heart aflame, head hush, tasting the world, lick and pant. The Holy Scripture is animal, not book. I should know. I have smoked the soul of God, psalm burning between fingers on an African afternoon. And how is it that death can open up an alleluia from the core of a man? How easily the profound fritters away in words and the simple wisdom of my brother. What you taste with abandon, even God cannot take from you. All my life, men with blackened insides have fought to keep the flutter of a white egret in my chest from bursting into flight, into glory. Number 3, Father. I have practiced this hate for so long it feels right. It is not that I have forgiven you, angel of my Eden, and it is not that the edge of my sword hasn't dulled. Forgiveness comes easy, forgetting does not. There is something here shared with many men, the love of a father caught in his anger and fists. We are a generation bred in fear and loathing and a certain quiet discontent. But there was melted ice cream and sugar ants picked from it. An entire childhood can come down to one night. But that was not all, surely. There was also the hand that caught me as I fell on rain-slick ground. And that day you heard me tell a dirty joke, and unable to stop yourself, you laughed loudly, wantonly. And the final poem. Ritual is journey. And suddenly it is raining, streaking train windows, and light becomes a bird, a particular flutter. What shadows let slip, tattoo patterns on skin, repairs with needle and ink, and the whisper of lineage. To be a man, to be a black man is a dangerous journey. My heart is a knot burling a staff, wisdom won blow by blow. Father, I say, Father, mercy come, mercy come. Brother, we share genes so old, England was still black and Africa was the only present tense in the world. As we unzip tracks in flashes of light, I seek an impossible dream, yet all rivers flow to the ocean. All the doors white men closed in my father's face cannot compare to the void in which my mother found no door. Mercy come, mercy come. This is no lament. It is true that women deserve our awe. In Africa, we say, he who strikes a woman strikes stone. And if women called out from all their loss and in all their power, surely blood would drown everything. And does that first Black woman regret letting us live? Still, ritual is journey, atonement is real. As you lay dying, I asked, what is your biggest regret? Every kindness withheld, you said. Every flicker of pleasure denied, you said. Look, you said, sunlight. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Wow. When I first read that manuscript, when you first sent it to us, I was nearly reduced to tears, and I'm just struck again by what a beautiful book of poems it is, and just so grateful to have you among us. So we'll come back and ask you some questions here at the end, but next it's my great pleasure to introduce our next reader, Dana Levin. As with Chris, we've been so fortunate to work with Dana across several collections. This is her fifth collection of poetry, and all have been published here at Copper Canyon Press. Her first book, In the Surgical Theater, was chosen by Louise Gluck for the 1999 American Poetry Review Hannach First Book Prize. And it went on to receive numerous honors, including the 2003 Penn Osterweil Award. Her most recent collection, Banana Palace, was a finalist for the Rilke Prize. Her fellowships and awards include the National Endowment for the Arts, Penn, the Witter Binner Foundation, and the Library of Congress, as well as a Rona Jaffe Award, a Whiting, and Guggenheim Fellowship. A teacher of poetry for over 30 years, she's currently serving as Distinguished Writer in Residence at Maryville University in St. Louis. Dana's new collection, Now Do You Know Where You Are, seems to function as both documentary and oracle, looking back on recent history, looking further back at ancestry, and flashing forward to our present and future possibilities. Now Do You Know Where You Are took years to write, assemble, disassemble, and restructure. The privilege of my job is that I get to be a fly on the wall watching that happen. And it was such a joy, there's that word again, to watch as she moved each and every piece of the puzzle until she got the book and got all the pieces into the right place and allowed the biggest picture possible. It's an extraordinary new collection, and I can't wait to share it with you, and can't wait to hear Dana read the new poems aloud to us. Dana.
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everybody. And Chris, those are gorgeous poems. I cannot wait to read them, but really, I think I want an audiobook so I can hear you read them. So the new book is called Now Do You Know Where You Are? And I'm going to read 3 poems that are sort of answers to that question. And the poems are called No, Maybe, and then I tried to write a yes poem and I never could, but then I wrote a poem called Into the Next Eden, which I think is the yes poem. So the first question, no. Hoping to just live quietly unnoticed, holed up, smoking pot and listening to old music after work, trying to wait out the regime, dreaming of tyrants and exhausted sleep, sick of having to think. Trying the long view in which years breathe and the great wheel always turns, but so much damage done as ash and seed change places as they always do. Was that still true? When you could see the fires of ending spreading, would you get to live? In greater days when no would blossom into yes and closed pride. Open-hearted, throated, minded, would you get to live as you thought you once did? No. Okay. This poem is called Maybe. Maybe was about all that I could muster. On the question of whether this world, which I prefer to think of in the past tense, will flourish. Though the first of the last fires hasn't even started yet, has it? Maybe the past tense because it implies survival. Back then, plus, but now, as if the future had already happened and you had made it out alive. Into midday living room peace, into 2 o'clock April light, you and a trailing coleus, survivor too, each leaf like a dab of dried blood on a scalloped pad of green. Sirens in the distance fading. Sirens in the distance above a wreck of ships perched where literature starts with war and lost men, heroes enticed to death by birds with the heads of girls, myth opening its blood-drenched wings. Maybe it wasn't future death hounding me, but past ends. Not popular apocalypse, but cracked Atlantis, golem Ozymandias, all the millions really dead in ruined capitals gone to ash and dream. Maybe it was my mother's scapegoat trauma blood keening. And suddenly I could see them, every empire that ever rose and fell, spread out on discs across an infinite plane called absolute now, like record spinning. All playing the same song, track by track. Ruin by better tech, ruin by hubris, ruin by appetite amok. And from this vantage, history looks like a choice. And I have to ask now, in the present tense, why choose the past as the future? This last poem, one of the last things I did to the manuscript was remove every poem about the pandemic, which felt good to do. And then at the very last minute, I put one back in, and it was the one that meant the most to me. And into the next Eden. I was supposed to go back to the sea, but plague prevented me. In a city by a river, no ship could take me, and planes, well, I stayed home for days with weekend drives to see my love, who didn't live with me. Night cranks up its float of stars. They inch and tarry. I was supposed to go back to the sea, but nature prevented me. It said, sit right down and let me clear the air. The sudden blue of the natural sky after years behind the smoke of money. Mother Nature, who had had it with us, that was my theory. So economical how she laid us and all our wrecking low. In another world, I'd perched on petrified lava, watching the sea go. I wanted to snatch each bit I saw and secure it in a book of glass. A rock in tide. Someone on the opposite cliff smoking. A schooner cloud, its reflection appearing in a book transparent and indestructible. Would the book even make it into the next Eden? I watched as a plant watches, rooted and waving in wind. One of those scrubby plants you can't believe blooms from a cliff. Sturdy miracle, flexible and porous so change can get in. The sea never stopped happening. It unfurled over and over its massive rows. Love and death, love and death, love and death, beating the cliff down to a nub. I was supposed to go back to the sea, and so I've come. Standing again inside my mind on Big River Beach. There, river tide and ocean tide push and marry. Seals swim up the river's finger for as long as there's salt. Standing again as I stood that day, watching a mother. A baby against her breasts facing out. Eyes round, mouth round as an O. It's the first time she's seeing the sea, the mother said when she saw me watching. The ocean wind blew our long hair straight back. We stood as flags pitched in sand, staking the human claim of being alive, of seeing the sea, the baby looking and looking. And then a thing like joy. Yes, did I know it? This open drinking in on her round face, as if she were seeing again something novel and lost. I thought of the reincarnational memory waking up inside her, how some things you are happy to see again when you return, like the sea. Thanks.
Thanks, Dana. That was, again, extraordinary. Really, really beautiful. We're going to have one more poet to hear from tonight, but we're also going to have a conversation once Victoria Chang has read her poems. And in case you're feeling as inspired as I am, we're going to again drop that donation link into the chat window so that you can click through at any time to help Copper Canyon Press, to help us keep publishing daring, bright, socially conscious poetry collections like these. And again, we also offer you the opportunity to use a QR code to go directly to the donation page. You can see that option on the screen in front of you. So our third reader tonight is Victoria Chang. Victoria is the author of 5 previous books of poetry, including Barbie Chang and Obit, plus her recent nonfiction book, Dear Memory, as well as 2 children's books. Her 2020 poetry collection, Obit, was named a New York Times notable book, a Time Magazine must-read book, and received the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, the Anisfield Wolf Book Award in Poetry, and the Penn Volker Award. Obit was also longlisted for a National Book Award, named a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the Griffin International Poetry Prize. Victoria is a brilliant critic and tremendous literary citizen. She's currently the poetry editor of the New York Times Magazine and lives with her family and her 2 dogs, Ketchup and Mustard, in Los Angeles. Her newest collection, The Trees Witness Everything, draws formal inspiration from traditional Japanese waka poetry, while also borrowing titles from the poetry of W.S. Merwin. I'll let Victoria talk more if she wants to about the way she came up with the constraints and themes of this book, but I'll just say that with each new collection, she's always testing boundaries, reinventing possibilities, and working the shadow areas between formal tension and expansive thought. Victoria is always willing to try new things out in pursuit of incredible intellectual and emotional depth. Victoria, can't wait to hear some of these new poems. It's your turn.
Hi, everyone. So I am going to start my timer. Thank you for coming. And I literally was telling everyone I just had emergency root canal surgery. So my whole side of the face is throbbing. I feel it's all crooked. So I'm going to do my best. I'm definitely not feeling my best. So just don't make any jokes and don't make me laugh because my mouth is going to just look really strange. But thank you so much at Copper Canyon Press. Thanks to everyone for making this really cool looking book. Look at that. Isn't that neat? It's like this little skinny thing. Thank you to Dana and Chris and everyone at Copper Canyon Press who worked so hard. I know you all worked so hard with such a small staff, and I really appreciate that. I see a bunch of you here. Thank you, Rio. I see Rio and Marissa for planning this. I'm just going to read a couple of these short little, I call them tiny poems. And my friend, Dana and my friend G.C. Waldrop called this whole book sort of like a project in miniaturization. And I just have been quoting him because he's not wrong. I mean, I was just messing around with syllabics and writing tiny poems just for fun. And there are all sorts of syllable patterns. So there's 577, 5757. There's just 57577, which is a tanka, 577, 577. There are a whole bunch. And those constraints were super important to me when I was writing, because I think after writing a book like Ovid, I just didn't really want to write about anything, if that makes sense. So I was wanting to write about nothing. And to make it even harder for myself, I repurposed W.S. Merwin's titles, as Michael was just saying, as sort of a way to avoid, as I mentioned, subject matter or preconceived ideas, and notice that his titles are super broad and fascinating. And I just had so much fun writing these poems. It was super hard. They're not always working, and I'm okay with that because I think it just was so fun to do this. So I'll just start at the beginning with a couple of these, and they're tiny. Again, they're not very long. This one's called Far Along in This Story. Once I sat in rain, opened my mouth to the sky. I yearned to be changed, but each drop was a small knife. At first, I fainted, but when I woke up, all the ticking had gone, and all the centuries were won. My choices no longer hurt. Losing a language. We were born with a large door on our backs. When will we know if it opens? And I should mention there are 2 on each page. And And sometimes I'll read two, sometimes I'll read one. Green fields. I was supposed to return to the fields daily. I haven't been there since birth. On some nights, I smell smoke that I think is God calling me. But when I follow, there's just a clothesline with half a life clipped on it, drying in the sun. Convenience. Youth stretches over everything, can be used once, then we turn it inside out. Snowfall. We say the snow falls, but it really seizes. Because it is light, it takes 7 years to grab. By the time it does, the old wars are over, and my mother is dead. But it lands on the new wars, melts on a different mother. Still morning. No mornings are still. The newly dead move the most. They force flowers to dilate. When you go away. I look at my hands, watch how they bend just like air, can sit still like ice, the small lines at the knuckles, how they can drag hair or cover a woman's mouth. I should have kept the ashes of her hands to see whether they could still be held. To the book. Here's March again. An image is a shawl. Birds are a transcript of our thoughts. To ashes. How many ashes do I walk through in one day? I have forgotten where my mother's ashes are. I think they are flushed into the earth. Yesterday, the crow gave me an invoice for its signaling of death. I owe 1 whole year. Avoiding news by the river. All the announcements, the mayflies land on a leaf. No one there ever looks up. Let's see, we'll skip that one. To the face in the mirror. Today I saw 3 crows fighting on top of the trees. I looked at myself in the mirror. I no longer looked like a poet. I had a crow's face. Now I know where all the dead birds go. Turning. My mother is dead. The lemons still turn yellow. The trout still stare emptily. Desire is still free. We still love many people. Eat peaches as if kissing. Gosh, there's so many of these. I could just keep going, but I think I'm going to shift gears. And I really hate that phrase too. I don't know why I just said it. I'm really sorry. I'm going to switch poems. And so this middle section is a set of poems that I wrote when I was in Marfa, Texas, and doing a residency there. And when I was there, I didn't do anything. I was supposed to be writing, and I didn't do anything. I was just walking around and sitting around and reading and really wasting a lot of time. And then a friend, actually the poet Dean Rader, was also at a residency at McDowell Colony, and said, you need to do something while you're there. So he started writing me these letters, and they were letter poems. And so I wrote these letter poems back, and then I took the deer off of them and then put them all together. And they look like little rectangular things because I was looking at a lot of visual art by the visual artist Donald Judd. So I'll just read 2 of these and then I'll stop. Today I tried to open the river, but when I pulled, the whole river disappeared. I used to think that language came from the body. Now I know it is in that group of mountains across the field beyond the fence. Yesterday I saw a red-tailed hawk. When I went near it, it took the wind with it. I was left without air, but I could still breathe. I realized everything around me I could do without. I could hear the mountains, but nothing else. I saw a car start up, but I heard nothing. A gray-haired woman said hello to me, but I heard nothing. I stood and watched the hawk. It never looked at me, but knew I was there. Neither of us moved. Finally, it flew to the top of an electric pole. I realized the pole is all the years of my life. The mountains, applause. The hawk, what I have been trying to tell myself. And this is the last one I'll read. Yesterday, while looking for the owl, I met a gelding. The horse was so still that it must have been time. I almost missed it because I didn't know I could see time. Time is the only thing that doesn't move when it moves. I stood at the fence, half hoping the horse would come over, half hoping I was the horse. I made noises with my feet. The horse turned its head to me. What are days for? Days are where we live. They are to be happy in. Where can we live but days? Wrote Larkin. My day was this horse. This horse is all my days with its bruises, tears, thin, overworked body. I pay all my debts to this horse. This horse is also all the hours of my life that are unlived. It is all human suffering at once. The horse knows this and doesn't move, doesn't come near me because suffering cannot be touched. At the courthouse, a woman saw me looking up at the tree. No owls today, she said. 2 live up there. This whole time, I had only been looking for one. One is my life, and the other is what it could have been. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. That was extraordinary, and you're amazing to be with us tonight after just getting out of surgery. And thank you so very much for sharing those poems with us. So grateful. We're going to move to a conversation with the poets in a few seconds, but as we do so, I'm going to invite you all to scroll through the chat window and see some of the reactions other viewers are posting there. I'm having trouble keeping up with all the comments myself, but I hope that you'll please continue to add comments. I'm seeing people from all over the world, including Bath, England, including Boulder, Colorado, elsewhere, just all over. It's such a joy to see you all out there, and I want to thank you. Listening to these poems here in my cramped little office, I'm struck again and again what a gift it is to encounter the words and wisdom of poets like CHRIS, Dana, and Victoria. I have a little bit of exciting news to share about upcoming books in a moment. And as we transition toward a conversation, I want to mention a book that many of you may already know, Lewis Hyde's brilliant book, The Gift. In that book, Lewis Hyde shows how across cultures and across human history, poetry and the arts have always operated in a gift economy. There's very little market value attached to this art relative to the mainstream, but there's such huge emotional value, political value, relational value to be found in poems. We just heard it and witnessed it in the reading. Poetry is just that. It's a gift. And for that reason, Copper Canyon functions as a nonprofit so that we can continue to give our attention to the art and craft of publishing books, poetry books specifically, the gift of this work. And if all the current and ongoing attempts to ban them are any indicator, books themselves are a powerful element in establishing what humanity is and might be. We need books of poetry not only to sustain us in challenging times, but to reaffirm who we are, to remind us of the amazement that surrounds every moment we are alive. I'm thinking of the birds outside of Victoria's window as an example. what makes this whole thing called Copper Canyon Press possible is the generosity of poetry readers, of poets, of translators, educators, of community members who all understand that our mission is important, that books like Chris's and Dana's and Victoria's are important, and who in turn make donations to help us sustain what we do so we can continue publishing such terrific books. And so I'm going to ask again, if you've not yet made a gift to Copper Canyon Press this season, please take a moment and consider giving generously. We need to raise $25,000 tonight to help us move these spring collections out into the world, alongside debut poetry collections by Akwege Amezi, Christopher Soto, and Michael Wasson, as well as new work by Kate Marvin and Sarah Rule and others, and to publish our fall books, which are equally brilliant. I'm thrilled and humbled that Copper Canyon's one of our board members has generously offered to match your donations up to $5,000. It's a great opportunity for us, and I hope you will join our board and others who are helping us to meet our goal. I can't wait to share with you some of the books we have planned for the fall a little further down the line. We're going to welcome the great poet Jory Graham to Copper Canyon Press, alongside the collected works of the Nobel Prize winner Tomas Transtromer, as well as an anthology celebrating the 50th anniversary of Copper Canyon Press. Can you believe we've been around that long? I can't, but I do. Those legacy books will appear alongside exciting new books from favorites like Tanem Bambrick, John Freeman, and Elena Klediak Davis, as well as brilliant debuts by China scholar Julian Gewirtz and Atlanta poet Nicholas Goodley, as well as poems by contemporary Japanese poet Shuri Kido, translated by Forrest Gander and Tomoyuki Endo. We really have some extraordinary books, extraordinary gifts on tap. And we're relying upon all of you out there who will make these books possible through your donations. So I'm going to ask you to consider making a donation at the link we've posted in the chat, or by scanning that QR code. No gift is too small, but with a donation of $50 or above, you'll be invited to select a complimentary book or books from our list of spring releases. So thank you again for your generosity. So we'd like to close this this evening with a conversation with some more joy in the form of conversation. And so I'm going to work in reverse order, and we've got another 20 or 30 minutes to chat. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box, and I will try and attend to them as best I can. But starting this time, I'm going to pose a couple questions for our guests, for our poets, and starting this time with Victoria and ending with CHRIS. I'm going to ask you to maybe, if you care to read a favorite poem of yours, I'd love that. But I'm hoping you might simply address what poems or what poets do you turn to during challenging times? Who brings you joy? Victoria, do you care to start?
Sure. It's funny, I was thinking about this question while I was lying in that dental chair, and side note, they found a piece of metal in my tooth, which is what caused all the pain. But anyway, I was thinking about this and thinking about how I don't really turn to one poet. So my personality is much more like a dispersion, so I have stacks like this high sitting next to my desk, and I end up reading more and I become more voracious. But that said, I did bring a poem to read. Can I read a poem? This is who I brought, Audre Lorde. And it's a beautiful poem that I've read a few times in public. But it's a poem called A Litany for Survival. And I'll just read it because I think it's a really cool poem. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone, for those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward, at once before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. Not joyful, but it moves me.
Oh, thank you. And again, I'll remind people, if you have any questions for the poets, please pop them into the chat. And I'm sure they'd love to answer some of your questions as well. So Dana, I'm gonna turn to you and ask you that same question. Is there a poem or a poet that you turn to, or is there a whole group like Victoria? You're muted.
Okay, hi.
We can just all keep our unmute ourselves. We'll have a nice conversation that way, I think.
I can't. I don't have a single poet that I go to when times are tough, which they have endlessly been, it seems, for quite some time. But this particular time, especially through the pandemic, there's two portions of Louise Glick's poem October that have just been on loop in my head. And the first one is the end of section 5 in October, where she's talking about riding the subway with a book and says at the end, "You are not alone," the poem said, "in the dark tunnel." And the dark tunnel is literal, but it is it is the now. And the way in which a poem can accompany you in suffering, even if what it is talking about is, and especially if what it is talking about is suffering, like Audre Lorde's poem. I mean, I think one of the things that poetry does, which is so incredible, is mirror for us, witness us in our suffering. And so it's not really about joy so much as just about being seen. And being seen in your totality is the amazing thing about poetry. So when I read those lines, "You are not alone," the poem said, "in the dark tunnel," that just feels like poetry to me. And then the other moment from this same poem is in the end of section 3, and it says, "Beauty, the healer, the teacher, death cannot harm me more than you have harmed me, my beloved life." And I really love that, in terms of just, I don't know, there's just something about it. Death cannot harm me more than you have harmed me, my beloved life. It gives me courage, and it seems wise in some way. So those are the moments that have been with me through our last little while.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to come back to you each with some more questions here in a moment. But Chris, can you maybe tell us something that you turn to?
I think because I think I'm thinking about it more as a poet than just a reader. And I'm struck by philosopher Simone Weil says that attention taken to its highest degree is the same thing as prayer. It presupposes faith and love. And then I think about the LA artist, the African-American LA artist, John Outerbridge, who said, for me, it is impossible to separate my art from my living. And so for me, poetry, in fact, most art exists all the time, as does human suffering. So I don't know that I turn to it for comfort in difficult times, because I kind of think that difficult times are meant to be lived as deeply and humanly and courageously as possible. And I don't want to turn away from anything but that lived moment, because we must witness it. And, you know, so funny that Dana and I didn't speak about this, but really for me, it is the act of seeing, because you have to see it, because true love is seeing everything as it is without turning away. So when we do turn away, hopefully, for me, it's not to comfort, but to art, to poetry that flows from us in moments of deep attention and prayer. And so in this way, we can make an art for all times, and then imbue all times and all things with something sacred, with something like prayer. And I was struck because there's a poem from a fellow Copper Canyon poet that hangs on my wall. I have a broadside from Taha Muhammad Ali, and the poem is called Twigs. And I think I want to read it because it says, it addresses this question in ways my words fail. And if you don't believe me, here's the broadside I'm reading from. Twigs, Taha Muhammad Ali. Neither music, fame, nor wealth, nor even poetry itself could provide consolation for life's brevity, or the fact that King Lear is a mere 80 pages long and comes to an end, and for the thought that one might suffer greatly on account of a rebellious child. My love for you is what's magnificent, but I, you, and the others most likely are ordinary people. My poem goes beyond poetry because you exist beyond the realm of women. And so it has taken me all of 60 years to understand that water is the finest drink and bread the most delicious food, and that art is worthless unless it plants a measure of splendor in people's hearts. After we die, and the weary heart has lowered its final eyelid on all that we have done, and all the things that we have longed for, and all that we have dreamt of, all we've desired or felt, hate will be the first thing to putrefy within us.
Taha was just, such an amazing being, and I'd invite any of you out there to do a Google search. The PBS NewsHour did a profile on him and traveled to Nazareth to meet him and talk with him. And it's an extraordinary interview. But anyway. So, Chris, I'll go ahead and maybe ask you another question, and you may have already answered it, but in the last answer. But so your own writing. I mean, I've seen in this new book there, as I mentioned, I think at the beginning, there's such an intimacy and a vulnerability, and to me, you're responding to something that was suffering for you. And so I'm wondering if you notice in your own poems a change in the way that you write as you move through suffering. And I'm hoping that you might address that, not as a reader, but as a writer. So.
Yeah. I think that I have been fortunate to my whole life of being in some spiritual quest or path or the other. Michael knows we've had long, funny conversations about this. But I think for me that there is such a thing as pain, but I think suffering is something that has to do with how we narrativize pain. And so the suffering is the story we make of pain. This last book, I think, and you had said this earlier, Michael, that it's perhaps one of my most intimate. And it comes out of the fact that my immediate elder brother, I grew up very close to him, is 4 years older than me, passed away from duodenal cancer. And I had a 10-month period in which I sat with him throughout, from till basically the coroners came to take his body. And he'd made me promise not to leave him alone at any point. So literally I followed him literally into the van to go to the mortuary. So as I sort of sat, and I had the night shift and my sister-in-law had the day shift. And so from 9 p.m. every day for 10 months to sort of like 9 a.m., my job was to, in the culture I come from, sing him across to the other side, to prepare a way for his family, to prepare a way for the departure. And so, but then it became really a story about one particular summer that we had smoked half of my father's Bible. I was 9 and he was 13, and we literally would take in, because it's onion skin paper, and we would roll oregano in it and smoke it, and it's something. And so the whole idea of smoking the Bible is sort of the ways in which ordinary human lives, and this is one of the things, I'm not Christian by any stretch, but I was in seminary and kicked out many times. But in the Bible, one of the beautiful things is there are all these stories, and in many cases, like if you looked at some of the female protagonists, quite feminist texts, really. But it's about ordinary people in crisis looking for transformation. And so this is really what was the approach to this book. And so all my work is always sort of been about taking people in extreme situations, people that we want to erase, we want to pretend away. And doing that from a distance is a lot easier, I've come to find, than doing it. And so when I was doing this book in the real time of it, some of the poems were written by his bedside. I started to realize that it can't be about comfort. It has to be about witness. It can't be about anything sentimental, but at the same time, it has to hold sentiment. It had to be beautiful, but not pretty. And it sort of had to be able to exist as works of art that connected with what was going on. There are poems about Lampedusa, but basically, like when you're sitting in the middle of this death watch, you're seeing everything going on around you, and it all becomes part of this nexus of your being at the moment. But it also had to be work that would stand outside of anyone knowing the context. It had to be work that was specific enough, but spacious enough to hold other people's reading, to hold other people's difficulty. And so that in a way, I think is sort of being the transformational part. And so look into traditions or to poets, and that's why I love this particular poem by Taha, because it's sort of the way in which someone takes on sort of like 60 years of the Palestinian conflict and being a Palestinian in that, and writes a transformative work that holds rage, like reggae holds rage, holds condemnation, but holds no bitterness. And whether you knew the context of the work or not, anyone reading this, wherever they are, would connect much more importantly with the deeper human things. And so I think that's really been my lesson as I'm moving forward, is to find an elegance that is beyond, that is not really, it's a craft, but it's not craft for beauty's sake. It's craft in a kind of deeply flawed human way. I don't know if that answers the question at all.
Yes, and you found that elegance. You know, I love you. I could just listen to you all night and talk with you all night, and maybe we will. So Dana, you mentioned kind of the process of your book a little bit. Taking things out and putting them back in. Can you maybe talk to us about how your writing adapts to the times, if you will? You did.
I'm teaching on Zoom. Okay, hello. That's just such a big question, because it's not intentional. It's, it's what's discovered. And I think what was hardest about this book was how much it wanted to talk about where we are in terms of asking, now do you know now do you know where you are? And it made me nervous. I'm very comfortable in archetypal realms. I like the realm of images and symbols, and it felt frightening and vulnerable to address where we are politically and socially and civically, and to talk about the realness of my life, and to leave the realm of archetypes a little bit and come back down to earth. And yet, in coming back down to earth, I feel like early readers, Victoria, I know I keep saying this to you, Victoria, but it meant so much to me. She read an early incoherent version of this big poem that turned out to be a whole bunch of little poems in the book, or infuse other poems. And she said, I don't know, I just kind of want to hear more about your cat dying in your dreams. And that just would not leave my head. Or this moment where an old student of mine said, maybe right now people just want to hear about somebody's beloved cat dying. I mean, because I was writing about my cat and it just seemed so ridiculous. But this same student said, love and grief never get old. They change and reappear too much for that. And so there were little pieces of wisdom that just kept coming at me that were encouragements to stay in the present moment and to stay grounded and to witness where we were while in the middle of asking, do we know where we are, kind of a thing. And maybe that's also because, you know, the book really began with hearing C.D. Wright's voice in my head saying, now do you know where you are, which is a line from Deep Step Come Shining. And right after the 2016 election, I just heard her voice saying that over and over for months. So the book was really felt led. And that's my own writing ethic, is to be led. And I guess being willing to be led is a deeply spiritual and surrendering path, because sometimes the muse will ask you to write things that you're afraid of. And that was my whole experience of writing this book. So I don't know if I answered your question, Michael, but that's what I have to offer.
That's plenty. Yeah, I love it. And yeah, it answers whatever my question was. I don't even remember now. But Victoria, if I can, turn, a little of the question to you, and I just want to reflect, with Obit, I think many of us know that there goes my cat. It's not Murray. It's another cat. So when your mother passed away, you started writing the Obit poems and adopted that form. And now, and now you are, you've written these poems that are, tankas and haiku, and we've talked a little bit about this, but it seems, something that I've noticed in my role as an editor is I'm seeing poets write in more received forms. So everything from more traditional sonnets to haiku to acrostics to whatever received forms. And I'm wondering if in certain ways it's a way to remove the self, I think is what you were saying in yours, by getting rid of having to choose a title and a form. And so, I mean, is that how you respond, is by removing those choices from your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think of poetry as being just fun. I mean, I think of it as being play, and even though the things you write about can be very serious, I just like to experiment and to try new things, and I don't mind failing. I don't mind if other people don't like it. For me, it's so fun. Our tools, like what we have to play with, are words. And so what can you do with words? yeah, I feel like, so for me, form is a really interesting way to restrict and constrict. I love that cat tail that keeps popping up, but constrict ourselves and get out of our own ways. And I also think that it's really fun to release the self of the self, like you were saying. And I think as writers, we can be so sort of self-focused. And even if we're not writing about the self, we're thinking in our own minds a lot. And so I think it's fun to try and get rid of that impulse. And for me, like each poem or each whatever I'm working on is just a chance to be someone else, if that makes sense. I think it's so, I don't know, maybe I'm the only one that feels this way, but I always feel trapped in my own body, and so for me, writing is a way to get out of that trap. And putting constraints can feel like you're restricting yourself, but I think it's super freeing. It's super fun. And that's what writing prompts are. We're all in the business of teaching, and we give writing prompts to get people to do things that they wouldn't normally do. And to me, that's the joy, to go back to joy of writing. It really is all play for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. And, I don't know if you guys have any questions for each other, but, perhaps this is a good place to stop, beautiful place to stop. And, so I'm going to, again, as we close down, my cat, Laka, the goddess of life giving and hula, we'd like to ask you to make a spring donation to Copper Canyon Press in celebration of the gift of poetry. This thing like joy. There's that link in the chat again, and we'll briefly share an instruction screen for anyone who needs it. But again, thank you so much for a great night, and thank you for all the comments and the questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to those in the chat, and I hope we get to see you all in person before too long. But it's great seeing you tonight here in this virtual space. So thank you and have a good evening.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.